r/AskReddit. Admissions officers essay coaches of Reddit. What was the most pretentious application you've ever seen? I got to interview some students for a special program in my undergrad. It was highly competitive and lots of people wanted it. Young woman comes in. I offer her a seat. I'd prefer to stand. This won't take long. It won't? No. My dad is the dean of one of the colleges, and my mom is one of the professors who established this program. I'm getting in. I emphasized that she really should take a seat. She refused again. So I say, hey, this interview, me approving you is part of the process. You have to do well in this to get in. You'll say I did well or my parents will make life hell for you. Her parents had zero impact on anything in my life and I told her as much. After articulating this to her I said, I'm going to give you a chance to walk out the door and restart this interview. Fresh start. She lost it and yelled at me. For like 5 minutes. I filled out the interview sheet with direct quotes from her tantrum. She didn't get in. A few days after decisions were made, I got an email from her father who was, in fact, a dean. He asked me to come in and have a chat with him. It was totally a request. I went to talk to him. When I went to see him he had a copy of the interview sheet where I had several direct quotes from his daughter. Some of the quotes were awful and directed at me, my family, and basically everything she could hit on. He apologized profusely for his daughter and asked if she could redo the interview. He was leaning on me a bit at this point. I told him that choices had already been made and she was not selected. The whole thing was mind-blowing. She was so entitled. I was a medical school interview coach, earning some extra money through med school. Some applicants were great, others were what you'd expect from kids whose parents are paying a tutor to teach them how to act normal. Our med school interviews are easy to pass, but difficult to do well in. They involve generic questions like your passion or interests, ethical scenarios, decision-making questions, knowledge of healthcare topics, etc. There have been memorable answers to mock questions. In terms of pretentious, I asked one guy what his hobbies were and he said he loved Armani suits and buying expensive coffee blends. Not a great answer, but what killed it was that he began describing the smoothness of the bean and licking and smacking his lips together in wet squelching noises. Another applicant's dad was a successful surgeon, so he argued in his answers I basically already know how to be a doctor, through osmosis. He'd failed the entrance exam 7 times and his dad opened a lot of doors for him, getting him research editor positions for his CV, etc. There were complex family dynamics. He would say really inappropriate things like, when I'm a doctor, I can buy and sell you and all your friends, all I have to do is pass this stupid exam and interview and my dad will get me a spot in the training program. You'll be struggling for years. He'd then flip to complaining for half an hour about how his sister gets treated like a princess, and call me at 10 PM just to talk. I declined further sessions but was pretty sympathetic. To be honest, whenever his dad called to arrange sessions and materials, he was very pejorative toward his son. I had trouble hearing him during one of the phone calls because of background noise until he stepped outside. Later found out that he had been calling me, a tutor, during his son's graduation ceremony. He missed his son going on stage to receive his diploma because he was arranging a booking time with me. It placed a lot of his son's defensive behavior in context. And no, he has not been accepted into a med school. That was 2 years ago and he emailed only a few weeks ago to request access to my Google Drive to brush up on some things. I granted it because when your answer to a conflict in teamwork question is, I tell them I'm sorry that they're wrong. No amount of Microsoft Word documents will change your performance. I worked in a very religious private school's admissions department for a few weeks, filing applications. The parents had to write a letter about their child and why the school would suit them. I'll always remember the man who wrote 3 pages about how successful a businessman he was, how he owned several businesses, how good he was at the school's main sport, and then attached a large check to the last page. Not a word about the kid. What I remember most, the rejection letter from the principal with a thinly veiled insinuation that bribery was immoral and not acceptable at this school. Letter simply said something along the lines of let me in X hall named after grandpa. He donated a ton of money, so this letter means nothing. He was right. Got right in. Go to love pay to play. Oh, I have one. A longtime friend's mother reviews college applications at an elite college. I saw her recently and she was telling us about some of the essays, and one that stands out was from a girl who clearly came from a background of great privilege. She described a day of shopping and dining at swanky places with her parents in the big city one day. At the end of the day they came across a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk begging for money or food. She initially passed him by, but then, seeing the American flag flying on the corner up ahead on the next block, remembered what this great country of ours was built on, as well as what life is truly about, and went back to give this homeless person her restaurant leftovers, all described with much self-congratulation. I'm paraphrasing a lot of it, but the part in quotes is exact, and will likely be repeated for some time to come, accompanied by chuckling, by my friend and me. The country was built on, and life is about, giving a homeless person your half-eaten burger and fries. I once got a binder with 19 letters of recommendation from what seemed every adult who ever vaguely met the student. We also got photocopies of her scuba license and lifeguard certification. This was just for a college with a 98% acceptance rate. We also had an essay question that was, if you could spend a day with anyone in the world, living or dead, who would it be and why? And some kid wrote about how the college admissions racket discounted who he was as an individual and that he wanted to spend a day with the college admissions officer so they'd really get to know him. Came off as a bit creepy. And, again, 98% acceptance rate. If you could write a coherent sentence and didn't murder anyone, you were going to be accepted. We didn't freaking care about your personality. Doesn't quite answer your question, but we recently had someone we had rejected for our most competitive course email us. He said that he regretted to inform us that he was unable to accept our rejection and would see us on the first day of the course very soon. One with $100 in it, pockets $100, denies application. Another application comes in. Bro, where my $100 at? $100 to find out. I went to space camp on a scholarship program after writing an essay to get in. One of the kids in my group, who time and time again proved he wasn't smart enough to write his own essay, bragged about how his mother wrote his and he didn't even want to be there. Messed up on both their parts to take away an opportunity from someone who actually wanted to go. For me, it's the students that disparage the very ones that provide their application support. The kids that bash their coaches for not starting them for X Games or complain about their teachers who give them too much homework. Meanwhile the recs and coaches are writing about how great this kid is. Never a good look. Obligatory, not an admissions counselor, but I was a master's student who helped a family friend's high schooler edit her college admission essay. The prompt was something about the greatest struggle they've experienced that made them who they are. Her response? My greatest struggle in life was that I was too academically advanced for my age and I was not challenged enough in school. Yikes. I used to tutor at uni and helped occasionally with my tutees' applications. One thing I always encouraged them to do was to mention their aspirations after graduating, and to mention why specifically this university. One kid, who'd been a pretentious ass the whole time, actually wrote in his essay that he didn't really care about the academic part because his dad was just going to give him a job and he graduated anyways. He chose the unis he was applying to based on how impressive they sounded and how good the party life was. I kept in touch with his sister. She was super smart and studied the same subjects as me, so I helped her out with career advice etc. Later on, she dropped into conversation later, with a noticeable bit of glee, that her brother was going through a challenging patch because his father informed him that no, daddy was not going to give him a free ride into a cushy job, and did expect him to get a real job. I reviewed an application from someone with test scores and grades in the upper percentiles of the school's average. As long as the essay was inoffensive and decent we would let him in. But his essay was easily the most awful thing I had ever read, to the point where I assumed that he was trying to sabotage his application. However, after we rejected him, he, not his parents, called the school complaining and sent an appeal begging for acceptance. His essay started out okay. The first paragraph he talked about why he chose this school. That was the prompt and what he hoped to achieve in his time in college. So far so good. But then it got weird. He talked about how he wanted to stop discrimination. The applicant was white. And how he saw racism for the first time in middle school kickball. Whenever a black kid would come up to bat, all of the outfielders would spread out. The applicant described this as systemic racism, and his way of solving it was to kick the ball further than any black person on his team, which he did. First of all, the whole racism topic came out of nowhere and the story didn't tie into anything. After this he started talking about his favorite podcasts, even mentioning some by name. If you want to know more about my personality, just listen to this podcast and you'll get a better understanding of who I am as a person. He closed the paper by saying, "I would like to close this paper with a quote," which I thought was a joke because there was nothing left on the page, just that single sentence. Apparently he just hit enter on his keyboard a bunch of times because on the next page was the quote that he wanted to close the essay with. It was a full page long manuscript of a Richard Pryor comedy routine about going to Africa for the first time. Yes, he kept all of the N-words in the routine, and even went so far as to replace all of the soft R's with hard R's for no apparent reason. At the end were 3 links to the podcast that he mentioned, which I didn't listen to because the essay was printed out when I read it, so I couldn't click the links.